Good evening. It's a pretty wild evening out behind me this evening, but I hope you're comfortable and warm in your own homes. It's a little while since we've done Lectio Divina, so I'll just refresh your minds as to how it works. First thing I shall do is read the Gospel for next Sunday, and we'll then sort of unpack its content and see what it's about. Then we'll have an opportunity with a bit of silence to meditate on it. In other words, what do we think the text we have heard and read is saying to us today? We know about its context. We then want to look at what it's saying to us today. We then have the opportunity to pray, and that's where we look at what we might be able to say in response and to act and to see what we can do. So we'll go through those processes, or that process, which also includes a little spot for contemplation. So let's begin with the Gospel for next Sunday. And the Gospel for next Sunday carries on exactly where last Sunday's Gospel left off. So the last words about the Gospel on Sunday that's passed was about the man who was the guest at the wedding and came without a wedding garment. And so the issue at stake here is that what Jesus said about him being cast out and coming not prepared for the wedding feast was something that essentially enraged the Pharisees and the scribes. And so that's where we pick it up. And this is what it says. The Pharisees went away to work out between them how to trap Jesus in what he had just said. And they sent their disciples to him, together with the Herodians, to say, Master, we know that you're an honest man and that you teach the way of God in an honest way, and that you're not afraid of anybody because a man's rank means nothing to you. So tell us your opinion then. Is it permissible to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus was aware of their malice, and he replied, You hypocrites, why do you set this trap for me? Let me see the money you pay the tax with. So they handed him a denarius, and he said, Whose head is this? Whose name on it? Caesar's, they replied. He then said to them, Well, give back to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. So that's what we're going to look at this evening. And as is so often the case, the gospel passage is a little bit puzzling. Give to Caesar what Caesar's is obvious looking at the coin, but we have to examine what it means to say, give to God what belongs to God. So let's try and set this in some sort of context. In a world where we're conscious of church, religion, state relations, we can think, for example, of Islamic states, where Sharia law is the law of the land, and where nobody really needs to work out anything in Parliament, by way of new laws, because all the answers are there for them in Sharia law. We also think of countries like England, where there is a special church-state relationship, an established church. And we think of secular states. One of the first secular states we think of is France. We think also of India. But we have to remember too that the United States, for all its interest in religious matters, is actually a secular state. That the two don't overlap, even though their politicians may overlap. But so France, the USA, and India are very good examples of secular states. But it is tempting to think that today's gospel, with Christ's famous sentence, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God, as being about this. Well, it's not about it, but it's a phrase that is often used in that kind of context and out of context whenever we start talking about the relationship between Christianity and the institutions and political power. But it's about something much more fundamental than church-state relations. So let's look and think about the phrase in its context. The Pharisees and the Herodians want to trap Jesus, even if each of them has got different views about the Roman occupation of Israel in that time. But when the establishment figures listen to the words of a prophet and find those words uncomfortable, so last week's gospel was all about the man at the wedding who wasn't wearing a wedding garment. Those who didn't like what they heard have to set out to prove that the speaker, the prophet, in this case Jesus, is in error or somehow contradicts himself. So today we read that after Jesus had told that parable, the Pharisees went away to work out how they could trap him in what he said. So they said to him, well, tell us then, what's your opinion? Is it lawful to pay this tax to Caesar or not? Now, it was a clever question, because if Jesus had said, no, it's not lawful to pay these taxes to Caesar, the census tax, then the Jews would have used that as the perfect opportunity to denounce him to the Roman authorities and turn him into Rome's enemy and a rebel, in the hope that then they would pick up the cudgel and have it in for him. But if he'd said yes to their question, that it is lawful, then they would have had the excuse to denounce him in front of everyone among the Jewish people as a traitor to his own people. So it was a clever question. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. They were hoping that it didn't really matter what he said, because it would condemn him in the eyes of one group or another. But as is so often the case, Jesus doesn't give them the answer that they're looking for. He simply invites them to look at a coin that was used to pay this tax. And he says in his answer that we are called to live as citizens of our own country, respect its laws, but knowing at the same time that every situation can and always must be related back to God. So for Jesus, it's not an either or, it's not a yes-no question, it's a both and. It's do what you are meant to do as a citizen, but also remember that you are answerable to God in everything, and everything is related back to him. So the coin that they look at, that they have in their hands, is imprinted with Caesar's likeness. We're imprinted with God's likeness, made in his image and likeness. The coin has got Caesar's image and therefore ultimately belongs to him. So what does it mean to say and give back to God what belongs to God? It means, I suppose, essentially that we belong to God. We see ourselves as answerable to him in some ways, and that we give ourselves to him. So Jesus is not simply talking about the political sphere. He is referring to it, but it's not the beginning and the end of his answer. This is a passage which reminds us of who we are and what we are in a world that's often lost its way. It's there to counterbalance the notion that I'm not answerable to anybody. Now, we look at various political leaders that we've had in this country and that we see in other countries. I won't mention any of them by name. But what we do know is that a culture has grown up in the Western world, in the UK, in the US, in Europe, that for many people, they see themselves as masters of their own destiny. They come first. This is a dog eats dog world in which we have to fight for our survival, and that at the end of the day, nobody really has a right to tell us what to do. And this, of course, has implications at all sorts of levels. I think it's particularly true in the present circumstances that we find ourselves in. I think, for example, that when lockdown began in March, there was a kind of beginning of war spirit, a sense that we all needed to pull together because we wanted it to be over quickly. But one of the things we learnt during lockdown is that there were two things that needed to be kept in balance: the health and safety of the whole of the public, from children through to elderly people. And that needed to be balanced against what it would do to the economy to shut things down. And so from moving to the initial response we made when we didn't fully realize what was involved, we're now in a situation where in different parts of the country where the lockdown is currently more severe than it is in our own area, people are beginning to go against the grain. There's a certain element of rebellion that's obvious. We saw that there was, hijinks in Liverpool last night, right up to the moment of the closure of pubs. We see puzzlement among those in the service industries who are wondering why the regulations differ so much from one side of the street to the other, not just because you might be in a different local authority, but because yours might be a restaurant while mine is a pub, and the regulations seem to be different. So there's a sense in which people are beginning to resent the kind of interference which they see coming from outside. And indeed, there are a number of people, quite a lot of people, saying, I'm not really going to take any notice of this. But for those of us who are Christians, it misses an important point. Because ultimately, what you and I believe in faith is that whatever restrictions there are around, we have a real freedom in Jesus Christ, who is our brother, with God as our Father, and the Spirit as the guide between them. Our relationship with them doesn't enslave us, but it makes us free, because at the end of the day, we know that if we know, understand, and carry out God's will, our conscience is clear, and a clear conscience makes us free. So that all of that kind of underpins the rest of our life. We're still entitled to say, I don't particularly enjoy or like what's happening, but I do know that if I try to do what's asked of me from lawful authority, then, I'm not going to go far wrong, because it may be prescriptive, it may be irksome, but it's not unlawful. It's not evil. It's not asking us to do something that doesn't fit in to the greater pattern of things. And this freedom that we have as children of God comes from the knowledge that we're not compelled, but we're invited. There's a lovely preface that we use at Sunday Mass from time to time, which has the phrase in it, "In you we live and move and have our being." Our life means that God is continually challenging us about our actions and our thoughts in relation to ourselves and to the world around us. If we start from the premise that we are masters of our own destiny and that nobody has a right to interfere, then we will live with a conflict within ourselves and a conflict with others. And the other two readings that we will hear at Mass from Isaiah is one which shows that Cyrus, the king, is told by God that I arm you, I equip you for your task, so that others might know from the rising to the setting of the sun that apart from me, all is nothing. So God is saying to Cyrus, your authority, your power, your role comes from the God who arms you from the rising of the sun to the setting of it. Then the second reading is Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, and it shows that he and Silas and Timothy, because he's writing in the name of all of them, are constantly thinking about the church in Thessalonica. He's able to assure them that God loves them and that they work in the power of the Spirit that's given to them in the preaching of that word. So that's the first thing we've done. We've read the scriptures. We have tried to unpick what they're about. And now we contemplate. And whenever we contemplate the scriptures we've heard, it's asking us to do this as an exercise, to see what kind of conversion of mind and heart and life is the Lord asking of me. And maybe this does say something about our basic standpoint in life. it may say something to us about our feeling that life is full of separate compartments, that, like Alistair Campbell, there are times when we find ourselves saying we don't do God. In other words, it's quite easy to separate religion from real life. So just think about that. Think about not about anything in particular at the moment, but our general attitude and whether there's a kind of change of heart needed, in which I suppose that the bottom line is that we're able to do a bit more joined up writing. So let's, for a minute or so, just pause and contemplate in that way. So the next thing to do in the process of Lectio Divina is move on from a sort of general picture of ourselves to relate what the text we have heard says to me today and to my life. So this is where we move from the general to the particular, from the perhaps more abstract to the concrete. And so this is about what is my attitude to people telling me what to do, what I should be doing, and what I must do. Do those kind of requirements of us make us feel very self-centered? Is that what makes us want to say, nobody else matters apart from me? As long as I can survive, then it's other people's problem. So do I find at the moment that my present attitude stops me from thinking about other people and acting in relation to them for their own good? So again, we'll take a minute or so just to meditate on anything that's going on at present that is stopping that conversion of mind and heart. It gets in the way, is a block. And so we move on to prayer. I've said it 100 times before, but prayer isn't always about finding words or the right words to use in our relationship with God. Sometimes prayer is just being still and quiet and seeing what comes in to our own thoughts. And even if those thoughts appear on the surface to be distractions, they may well be a reflection of what's uppermost in our mind at the moment. But it may be that we do find it possible to use our own words in thought. And they may be saying things like, Lord, help me through this muddle where things seem a bit confusing, where I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next, where I'm not sure how strict I have to be in observing the regulations that are there. It might be about saying, I don't like others, Lord, interfering in my life. But it might also be saying, but I don't want to block the world out. So it's being before the Lord with all our limitations, knowing that it's not always easy to know how to respond or to do the right thing. So once more, we'll take a minute out on that. And finally, we come on to the action bit. What can I do about the things I've reflected on, thought about, and prayed about? Well, the first thing is to ask, is there anything I should be tackling right now? Is it about wearing face masks? Is it about social distancing? Is it about gathering in groups of 6 or less, or 6 or more? I know I talk quite a lot about the pandemic, but the difference between the pandemic and other things going on in our lives is that the pandemic has repercussions for every single one of us. And therefore, it is a current issue that we're faced with all the time. And we may be the kind of individuals who cut corners in certain directions and are a bit slapdash in others. I certainly am aware of that I can be quite choosy, and I realise that I shouldn't be in some circumstances. So it's no bad thing to be able to focus on something that applies to us all. But at the same time, if tonight's scripture readings and our contemplation and meditation and prayer and action are about something very different, well, that's absolutely fine. So let's have a final minute on what we might do by way of action, and then I'll sign off. Well, I think this is an evening for battening down the hatches, keeping warm, pouring yourself a drink, either hot or cold, and enjoying the rest of the evening. Good evening and God bless.